Welcome everyone to the November 19th Women's Foundation of Oregon Policy Committee meeting. Hey, Carol, welcome. Excited to have you guys here and excited to introduce our guest today. And it's really, really interesting because we have a topic that I think not everyone is really very familiar with, but it's a very important topic, and that's traditional ecological knowledge. And so we have an expert here, and her name is Samantha Chisholm Hatfield. Welcome, Samantha. Tell us a little bit about who you are.
Thank you so much. Well, Chela, um, Dr. Samantha Chisholm Hatfield, well, I'm Nashi, Shitatutin Chinook, Kalapuya Salagi. Hi, I'm Do Dr. Samantha Chisholm Hatfield. You can call me Dr. Sam or you can call me Sam. Um, and I am enrolled with the Confederated Tribes of Siletz here in Oregon. I live on my homeland areas. I'm from the Tututni, the Chinook, and the Kalapuya bands. And my expertise, as Libra has said, is traditional ecological knowledge. I'm an environmental scientist and I look at all things environment. I just love being outside, and that's kind of where it led me. I grew up very traditionally, and I'm still very rooted in my culture and my ways. And I'm really, the older you grow, I think the more appreciation you have for life and those things that you um, realize keep things going, and how life is rooted in some of the most basic things around you.
Oh my God, so true. And super excited to have you here today. Full transparency, because that's how we roll at WFO. Kristen and I were a little challenged finding a guest today, and we were super lucky when Dr. Sam said, I'm in. I got it. And their expertise is exactly what I think is appropriate for today. So let's get started. We had a couple questions, and then we'll make sure we leave some room for folks to ask questions of Dr. Sam before we get out of here. So the first question I have for you before we dive into anything is, what is something in the natural world that is bringing you joy or inspiration lately or today?
Oh my gosh. The change of seasons. I love to watch the change of seasons because I know that everything is shifting. And while a lot of people get really upset about the change of seasons, it's a natural part of life in that we get to watch all of these things shift, and we know that it's going to come back around. A lot of people say, I wait for spring, I wait all year for spring, or I wait all year for summer. And I'm like, well, if we did that, it wouldn't change. We'd be in Groundhog Day, of that movie Groundhog Day, all, repeating the same day over and over and over. So I think that getting to appreciate all of the leaves changing and them falling, and knowing that those nutrients are actually feeding, and looking at it from a different perspective, it really is joyful in the fact that it's feeding us. So that that brings me joy. And a lot of people think I'm weird in that aspect, but I'm like, wow, look at this. They're becoming bare. The trees are going to go into hibernation and they're going to get stronger. And all of these things are going to be more beautiful when they come out again. And it's like a cocooning almost. So,
That's such a great perspective because I got to tell you, I moved here from Hawaii and I had to start thinking like that, right? Because you quickly start to say, "Oh, there isn't this, there isn't that." But if you start to think about what it is, then it's absolutely beautiful, right? And it's so much contributing to our environment that we need. And so I really appreciate that perspective. Before I get into the official questions, I got to ask you because your background is just wonderful. What do we have back here? Like, it's a
oh
pretty
my goodness.
incredible, colorful
This is
background.
Yeah, this was not intentional. This is just how my house is set up. So
Okay.
somebody else, my one of my friends was like, "Oh my gosh, I love how you've done it, so you don't have to put one of those screens on." And I was like, "No, that's really just how we live." That's like, so this is my son's drum. Let me get my pointer up, my fancy pointer here. This is my son's drum. It's a hand drum, and he's a natural singer. He was a born singer. He started singing when he was about, gosh, 18 months old or so. We were like, okay, well, I guess you're a singer. So that's his drum, and we just put it there. This is my great grandfather's gaffing hook. So he would the end is has like this open roundness to it, and you put it on a pole, like you put it on the pole, and then the rope would tie around it, and then they'd gaff. You put it in the water for salmon, and you'd gaff salmon up with it. So that's a traditional like family heirloom. And then some of the things that I got from Korea, specifically Jeju Island. It's this little guy over on this side is they have gates. It's made of Jeju Island in Korea is a volcano, and so it's volcanic rock, and then they have these gates that are traditional TEK, um, uh, like a gosh, a marker almost. And so the gates have always have these three posts, and when they put them in certain ways, they mean certain things. And so the locals know what they mean in however their gates are. And then my little baby moccasins up here, and then all of my blankets are my eagle feather. It's kind of fallen over there. But my blankets have been gifted to me for different things, and my blanket behind me is the one that I was gifted for earning my PhD. So it's just kind of like, representing who we are, and, a reminder of keeping going, and that sort of thing. So, sure, what
That's
else?
gorgeous.
So,
I thank you for sharing that. I mean, I just was as soon as you came on, I was like, okay, I gotta know. Like what is going on? And of course there's meaning to it, right? But thank you for sharing the meaning and giving us context to what's behind you. In particular, I gotta say, I was drawn to the hook because it I knew it had like ancestral connections because it's obviously something that's not of this time, right? And so I really appreciate you sharing all of that. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful background. Nice to have as a visual. So thank you. So let's dive into these questions in your expertise as we look at how TEK is currently discussed or implemented in policy spaces, which this is what our work is here around policy. What concerns you most, whether it's misuse or tokenism, gaps in understanding, or structural barriers, and what would you want organization like ours to be mindful of so we can be better and more intentional in contributing to the good and not to the harms.
yeah, great question. All of the above. There's so many things. I think first of all, I just want to say that TEK as a term first started in the late 60s, 70s. Anthropologists were using it, and then ecologists started going into tribal communities. They asked the social scientists, what does this mean, and what is this? And because hard science is all about taxonomy and categorization and all of those things. So TEK was developed as a term to encompass all of that they were seeing. So keeping that in mind, that it's a westernized term, when I go into, or the researchers go into our, traditional communities, and even other Aboriginal communities or Indigenous communities, they don't say we're doing TEK. It's a policy thing, it's a management thing, it's a very specific term. So there are actually EKs for all kinds of things. So there's Fisher's ecological knowledge. One of the most widely known is the farmer's ecological knowledge, which is the Farmer's Almanac. And everybody knows that. And they're like, oh gosh. So there are a lot of EKs out there. There's also local ecological knowledge. So one of the things that is concerning is that I often get sent papers to review, or often, asked to consult, and there are EKs in systems and even in professionals that are like, I do a TEK, and it's actually not traditional ecological knowledge at all. So that's a really difficult thing to watch and see, is this an application that should be attributed to something else or should be combined with, another process? because it does make a difference in how it's looked at, because then you are structuring it in a different manner, or you're looking at a different system in a different way. TK is very holistic, and some of these others, like fish, you can't just say, I'm going fishing. Well, what are you fishing for? Are you fishing for shrimp, or are you fishing for salmon? Totally different. You're going to not use this hook for shrimp, obviously, or any kind of hard fishing pole that's huge. You're going to use a different method. And so that's one of the really big misconceptions that I run up against. And that's a really wide standing, continuously running issue for
Yeah,
sure.
so I guess what I'm hearing is because I was unaware that there was such a broad level of EKs, right? So I appreciate you naming that because now I feel like I can be armed with the understanding when I'm listening, right, for the proper EK and not just assuming that everything is the same or we're talking about the same EK. So definitely appreciate you naming that. I think that's just a powerful way to kind of move in life is having a better understanding of things so that you can be less harmful, right? And sometimes harm is unintentional, but it's still harm no matter what. So appreciate that context. So next question, and I'm putting the questions in chat for everyone just to know what I'm asking, and then that way you guys are aware. So, from your perspective, what is one of the most common misunderstandings policymakers have about traditional ecological knowledge, and how could integration of TEK be more intentional in change in the way Oregon approaches climate policy?
Oh my gosh. So these are great questions. So I think that one of the things that is sorely misunderstood or overlooked is that the assumption I frequently come into a discussion on is that Indigenous science is somehow lesser and not as informed and incomplete. And so the policies around that are like, well, these tribes don't know, and it's almost a parentification of these tribal groups who are sovereigns. And tribes are, if a tribe is a nationally recognized tribe, if they're a federally recognized tribe, they have sovereignty. And what that means is if you're dealing with that tribe, it's a government to government relationship, just like a government would deal with China, or they would deal with Japan, or they would deal with New Zealand, So all of these systems have been developed, and most of all, I don't know of any tribe, let me just say that doesn't have like a constitution. It doesn't have a governing body of some governing board administration. And that is really in specific areas very important for policy making, because that needs to be recognized as well. So this, really condescending attitude is detrimental to all of these. And when there's land held in trust, or when there are, companies operating things like spillage into river systems where water is really incredibly important for sustenance and treaty right collections, those issues have to be addressed and often are not.
And I mean, our country does not do a good job of recognizing things that are non-dominant culture. And I think you are definitely, clearly stating what so many of our communities of color, it's the concept that something is reduced when you are not of dominant culture. And dominant culture has created structures that have been so harmful. So it's like, why would you not want to listen to something different? Because clearly this has been harmful and there's a lot of things that we need to fix and there's some answers in some of these other communities. So I really appreciate you naming that. And also in connection to that question, in that perspective that you have about the misunderstanding from policymakers, how would you say that women's roles in the community can be elevated in TEK in terms of policy making and understanding.
Yeah, yes, yes. Well, historically, most tribes have been matriarchal. So it's very matrilineal. It's very focused on, women's strength and power and having that. It's not that they would replace men. It was that it was more of an egalitarian society, but women were really held these pivotal roles. And I think that that goes back to, what is misunderstood and what is overlooked in that patriarchy is so embedded that helping move out of that in a more fluid way to, give those roles or give that voice. I cannot even tell you how many times men who are less qualified that were non-native were promoted before me. Just last week in a meeting, I had a man speak over me. I was, in a round of introductions and he cut me off and, we went right on. I said, "Hi, I'm Sam." And he said, "Next." And I was like, "What?" And everybody was like, doing their thing. "I'm from da 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 da," and I was like, "Okay, well, all right." And so it's, recognizing those kinds of basic assumptions, and everybody was just okay with it. And I was like, those kinds of things happen all too often. "Oh, well, it was just a misunderstanding. Oh, well, it was just, don't make excuses for it and let people hold space. Let those women hold space who have information." And there's a lot of women who have information. I can't even tell you, especially in Native communities, we have been, the caretakers. Many times women were caretakers of the land. They knew where to get stuff. Even now, there are people who know where to go get the medicine still. They know where the places that are safe are, that don't, require a group to maintain that safety. And so those are really big things. And people kind of are like, "Oh, that's so simplistic." But it's a really big thing. If you have to be safe, or where those are, and people are wanting that information in your group, or are asking to have a place recognized or protected, or that sort of thing. Those are really big ticket items to recognize. So
Yeah, I
I
love
think,
that. And it goes back to what you were saying earlier, lesser, non-informed, and incomplete, right? Like those are examples of how they're not lesser, they're well informed, and they are absolutely complete, and they complete a community, right? By having those contributions. And I also love it because when I was listening to you and your example, we're shifting our work and really thinking about how dreaming can be data, right? And how the human spirit in dreaming creates vision for us. And it's non-traditional, right? It's definitely not what we've always done in terms of research, in terms of thinking. We've constantly moved towards like what didn't work, and then we think from a deficit place, right? And all the examples that you're giving are not from a deficit place, they're from a strength place, right? And that is what Indigenous people, people of color can contribute to policy, right? This concept of can we get outside of our own selves and understand that there's something bigger than just structures, right? Like there's something bigger that is just innate in human beings. And that is where we need to go back to because that's where we find care and love for each other, right? And so I just
yes.
love what you're saying. Love it, love it, love it.
Yeah. And it's not about what has to be bigger and better and new and cutting edge. It's what we have. I mean, like one of the big things right now is don't get rid of the leaves. It's so simple. Don't get rid of the leaves. It makes it, like the soil will be better. You don't have to add all the fertilizers and all the chemicals. You don't have to get rid of, there will be more bugs, but there will be more pollinators and there will be more, and all of these things are so we have them. We don't have to be looking out there for and discarding it because, oh, that's old. Oh, we know that already. Some of those are really good things to keep knowing and implement.
That's true.
So I
I
think
think
that
that
that's
that
something
is
that,
the takeaway of today, Dr.
yeah,
Sam. Do not get rid of the leaves. Like
yeah,
that's our grounding today. I love that.
It's just really, anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I actually have leaves right now on my lawn, and I'm like, yeah, not moving them. They're staying.
Yeah, yeah, and so that's, I mean, it seems so simple, but
Yeah.
things like, HOAs are so against, they have to
Oh,
have clean lawns, and lawns came about as a status symbol.
yeah.
It's not a natural thing. We originated by the settlers wanting, fancy lawns like Europe had. And
Mm-hmm.
that meant status. And so everybody needed to have a lawn. And
Mm-hmm.
so, that policy of needing to have your lawn and needing to have it edged and, HOA policies have come strictly from that. I mean, like you can really see that lineage. And
Mm-hmm.
those kinds of policies seem, just minuscule. They're on a local level or they're, oh, that doesn't matter. Those are big things because that contributes to the wider community and the ecosystems and the watersheds and all of it. And
Mm-hmm.
so there are no small, I always argue this, there are no small issues. It's
Mm-hmm.
all one big issue. It's just a component of that issue.
Yeah. That's really powerful. By the way, I have an HOA meeting next week, so I will be quoting you. And we've had a great fall this year, right? And it makes sense in terms of what you're saying, just in terms of how the world should be working. But it also is really beautiful if you just let it go. And I just, yeah, really powerful stuff. Appreciate your perspective on that. If we could recommend one immediate action, policy-based or practice-based, that organizations or individuals could take to honor TEK and uplift Indigenous ecological leadership, what would that be from your perspective?
If I could do my magic wand would be that we would make um, it a mandate for any policy to consult and meaningfully consult with every tribe in the area. And I know that that would slow things down, and people would be like, oh, but we don't have time for that. But meaningful consultation and incorporation of that is part of where we fall apart in, you know, all parts of that system. It's just very frustrating to, come in and people will be like, well, we need to get you know, your perspective on this, and we're at this place in the, and I will say, what did the tribe say that you consulted that's, they have, overlap on the land, or there's an easement, or there's a, oh, well, we haven't talked with the tribe. Then why are you bringing me in? I can't speak for tribes directly. They have their own government. It's like me saying, well, I'll speak for South Korea because I went and did some research there. It's insane. And it's just like, what are you doing? I think that that would be number one. And by enforcing that, we would, people would have to figure out, oh, that's right. This is the policy that they have. Oh, this is their way. I think that even if we have students that want to go work with tribes and we teach them how to do that and what that structure is. What do they look like? What's that tribe look like internally? What is their, system of government? What is their, do they have court? Do they have a judge on staff? Do they, what are they doing? And that is really important. And those students gain a lot. But oftentimes I've seen students that get into agencies or organizations and they just kind of like, oh, well, it doesn't really matter because they're not one of us. And that kind of is the wrong way to go. I see it as a backslip almost because that is really important when it comes up again, and it inevitably does. So it's just that would be one thing that I would, wish that we could do on a regular basis.
Yeah, I wrote down meaningful consultation because I think the term is really powerful because there are all these like check in a box kind of things. I sit on the state school board, and so they give us these presentations, and there is I think it's like a Senate bill that requires the state Department of Education to consult with tribal organizations and everything that they do, right? So they give us these, and it's other things they have to check into. So they give us these like checklists, like we did that, we did that, we did that. But when you say meaningful consultation, it gives me words to, I think, what my insides have felt from that checklist. Like I see the checklist, right? But was it meaningful consultation? And, is it something that really resulted in true listening? And is this something that resulted in when you listened, you actually made a change? Or did you say, I went, I check it off, and we're moving on, regardless of what was said? So I guess a follow-up for me would be when you say meaningful consultation, and this would be for any group, right? Like when people are engaging, like what does that look like to you, that kind of meaningful consultation?
For me, it means inviting, sending out invitations to, if you have a quarterly meeting, if you have, an investors meeting, if you have, whoever is in that big group, but also in your smaller meetings or your breakout groups, do you have a role assigned and open for somebody to come in? And that doesn't just mean tribes, that may mean a community organization that is looking at, you know, X and such. A group that is really concerned about something that you overlap with? Do you hold space in your organization for that voice? And that's really important. Can they sit in on those meetings so they're not just, bombarded with a bunch of information and then put on the spot, like this big spotlight, like, okay, now what do you think about this? They have to have time to process. And a lot of times these are representatives who come in for bigger groups, and so they have to take it back to the group. It's a process. Nobody makes, well, very few people, I shouldn't say nobody, because there are very few people who make decisions on the spot in a silo on big issues like this. So maybe, consider that when you're thinking about how your process works for, this organization, that organization, consultation. So that's one of the things that I see a failure. It's just like this big gaping hole in almost all the, you know, from nonprofits to government organizations. It's just this really glaring, you know, indicator.
Yeah, great point. And great, like, kind of, you named a couple things that I think are easy for people to assess, right? Is this happening? And I think someone in the comment even like named it too, like an invitation to community to participate, right? Like, not an invitation to check your boxes.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
tokenism is not what we're trying to do. Like, we want people to actually be heard and have their voices elevated and used, right, in the work that we need done for our whole community to feel safe. Um, so really appreciate that too. So looking ahead, what do you see as the most promising opportunities for collaboration between Indigenous knowledge holders and non-Indigenous institutions, especially around climate resilience and ecosystem management?
I think that Indigenous knowledge is really being incorporated. We saw it kind of surge after like Al Gore and in the 2000s, when climate scientists were like, oh my gosh, this is not working. Whatever we're doing with Western science isn't addressing it, isn't chipping at it, away at it. We're not making any headway. And so that's when they turned to, Indigenous knowledges to look at alternatives, and we're like, oh, wow, this has been going on. Um, that said, some of the ways that it's incorporated is difficult to navigate. Um, but I think that as time goes on and people flag, what is accurate information, what I term valid TEK, and what is not, is really improving. And so that the depth of information is really important. So vetting that, getting the right people, people are learning how to do that, and that's really encouraging. So that's a really exciting frontier to be embarking on. so
Hmm.
that we can make some changes and make some headway in that, you know, what we're doing matters.
Yeah. Yeah, Al Gore, that's a name from the past.
Yeah, right.
That's cool that I mean the name is being used in the way that you used it. So I think that's pretty cool. I have to definitely look back at some of his work and see. And it reminds me too how sometimes the work that we're doing in the moment is not necessarily recognized or seems relevant, right? But it doesn't mean that you stop because look, we have so many people that were passionate about something during a time that nobody cared, and then you fast forward and it's everything to us, right? And
Yes.
so
Yes,
it's
exactly. Yeah. In TEK we had elders up, in Alaska and around that were talking about the change and climate change, what we now term as climate change back in the 50s and 60s. They're like, these are changing. This is different. And they're flagging it. And people, in the dominant society were like, until it came about in the what 90s and 2000s, it was really really breaking in the 2000s. So it's there are always, just keep going with whatever you're doing because it will make a difference. It might not be like you say in the moment, it might be down the road, but it's going to.
And isn't that, if you could share with me maybe examples, but to me, I know for me culturally in my community, doing things for people that you may not know or beyond your existence is actually an honor, right? And I think that we've lost that kind of sense in a lot of the simulation and trying to be something that we're really not. But it's I would love for us to go back to more of that because, being selfless and knowing that you may not see it, but somebody will is, in my opinion, really powerful. But in your world and in your community and with your ancestry, is that something that resonates with you, or what are your thoughts on that?
Oh my gosh, yes. So I am doing what I was told to do. So when I was doing my dissertation, um, you know, in my family, my great grandpa sat on tribal council, which is like being in politics, right? It's our political entity. And then my auntie sat on council, and generally in my family, we are told, somebody's picked almost, and we're told. And so my auntie came to me, and my dad said, well, it would be great if you would be chairman someday. And I was like, oh, I do not do politics. I don't like it. I've never liked it. I get it, but I'm like, you know. And so I was like, what else can I do? Because you have, the thing that we're taught is that you have to give back. You're of service. And I was like, well, I'm really good at this. I know what I'm talking about when I'm in my element here. And it didn't dawn on me until later. And so I was like, well, I can give back a dissertation because that way it's published. That way they can, like take it into court and use it. We had some remains uncovered, and they built a bridge, and they were like, well, we can't prove it's yours, so it all goes by the wayside, and they didn't give it back to us. And it was kind of a fiasco. And so I was like, well, how come we don't have this? And at the end of my, I was like, okay, this is what I'm gonna give back. And at the end, my several of the elders who I interpreted or interviewed for, I used to be a sign language interpreter before this. So they said, this is your path. This is what you need to do for the people. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's like, what? I'm going to be done, and then I'm going to get an office job in cultural resources somewhere. And I'm just going to live my life. And that was my plan. And here I am. So everything that we do is for our people in some way. And so I can see what needs to be done for my son, and then for his kids, and for his kids' kids, as well as for the general tribe, and how we need to go. If we're going to protect our lands, if we're going to protect our rights, if we're going to protect, the things that matter most to us and make us who we are, we have to, kind of move back. And then we also have to move with other spaces. So that means dominant society. How do we move in that society? So being of service to everyone benefits everyone. And so that's kind of where I come from. I mean, how would you not want to be on this beautiful planet and look at all these beautiful things that we have? I mean, you can take a walk and you breathe this great air and you see, these beautiful trees and you've got, smiling people that, well, sometimes you have grouchy people, but people watching is fun. How do you not want to be here in a space that's beautiful and make that a beautiful space and contribute to it? And so that's kind of where I come from.
I love that. And I particularly love it because I am of the belief that when people like yourself say and live the way that you are saying, it it impacts all of us, right? And so I say thank you for that work because I know like your focus may be your people and your children, but I also know that because we're all connected, it impacts me and my children and their children, right? So I just am really, really thankful for the work that you're choosing to do and allowing people to assign you to, because that taking on that purpose impacts all of us. And so really, really appreciative of that. So last
Yeah, the
question I
ripple that
have.
the ripple that we make makes a difference. And
Yes,
that ripple doesn't just go in one straight direction, it goes in all directions.
that's a
So
great analogy. Love
so we have
that.
to think about that.
Stealing that. I'll give you credit for it, but I'm stealing that. Love that so much. I have one question, and then I know that folks in here have questions, so I want to leave space for them. We believe, like I said earlier, that dreaming is data. Our theory of change believes that everything begins with rest, and when we give rest to our nonprofit leaders, it allows them the space that they need to really begin to dream again and kind of get out of this like really awful deficit place of these times that we're in, right? And so, with that in mind, and knowing that you are absolutely future generation focused, if you could imagine an Oregon where TEK is not just referenced, but fully lived in our climate policy, land management, and community decisions, what does that Oregon look like to you? And what becomes possible for future generations?
Oh my gosh. I think that any big decision would be, put to the people. So all of the things like the first thing that comes to mind was the LNG discussion, where people don't have to jump in and fight and organize from a very confrontational almost manner, whether it, be in person or, protesting or that sort of thing, but, coming to the table and being able to have discussions. So that whole structure would change. People talked about the LNG line and the shipments that would come down the coastline, and native tribes were really concerned because not only are we, the tribes on the coast marine focused, but there's also a canoe journey that happens up and down the coast from Washington up into Canada and back down. And we were all seafaring peoples. We went out into the sea, and that was our highway back when. And so things like that, we try to reinstitute into our culture when those were taken away and we weren't allowed to do them anymore. Um, and so leaving space for those kinds of cultural protocols and reinvigoration of that and incorporation of that into these policies and taking time to consider what might not be, just dominant society's focus. And I know that that's a really difficult thing to do for a lot of people. They don't know what they don't know. And so that's why you have to leave space at the table and invite communities to be like, what don't we know? But be open to that as well. And I think that, it would be a greener space and we would leave areas that would be what we promote as Oregon being green, instead of the clear cuts that are happening or the desecration that, or the over consumption that happens, having those boundaries of no, we can't do this. This is a green space. This is a, wire-free zone, or, this is, from here to here, you just come and be. So there's so much information about, like grounding and being in a forest environment and how that's healing. I mean, like they've done studies on that. And so why aren't we incorporating that with, it would be nice to have some pairings of, like insurance companies or health organizations that would encourage those and sponsor that. And, why are we not focused on that rather than the green dollar being the bottom line? Those kinds of things are really important.
Thank
That
you.
would be my
Uh,
dream.
that's I love that so much. And Sasha, I love forest bathing. Like that's an amazing uh term. Love that so much. I saw one question in here. I'm gonna pull it up. How can individuals be useful in asking for more TK in our government practices?
Directly. Ask them directly if you contact your representatives, if you talk with anybody on any level, say what TEK has been incorporated here and really press them. Well, da, 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 da. No, from who? Where did it come from? What's your plan on incorporating more? I mean, really kind of push the issue. And even if they don't have a response, it sets the wheel in motion for like, oh yeah, one of my constituents asked that, or oh, that came up in the meeting of the other day, or oh, so bringing it up again and again and again. And then, if you reference things, if you post things online, look for Indigenous researchers, look for Indigenous, reports, look for tribal information that they're, hosting an event or they're doing, like the canoe journeys are very public. Anyone can go to those. So are you attending, some of those things? Are you attending, local powwows? Are you, going to help? I just saw up in Milwaukee, there's a camas planting with the Portland Community Gardens, and they have a camas planting that's occurring in December, and anybody can join and do that. Or camas is a traditional plant here in Oregon that's sort of like it's a bulb and it's a potato, but it's really beautiful and it's kind of purpley blue, and so that's an amazing opportunity. One of the other things that occurs is traditional fire use. And my dad, when he was alive, remembered the last time they burned through the valley. So it used to be burned like from the edge of Portland all the way down through Springfield and Eugene. And that regenerates and it really brings things alive. And one of the arguments that comes up frequently is that we're not allowed to burn as tribal people anymore, but it burns off a lot of the understory that contributes to wildfires and those high heat wildfires. So really low controlled burns, if they're done in successive manners, don't contribute to those high heat fires because they don't have the understory litter to use as fuel. So it's, those kinds of things are really pivotal for making our spaces more healthy in a variety of ways for everyone.
Love that. Love that. We have a couple more minutes for anyone that has questions for Dr. Sam. I mean, this has been an incredible conversation. But if you have questions that we did not ask, please, please, please put in the chat or come off the mic and ask yourself. I mean, I don't have to read them for you. So please ask, ask, ask. But while we're waiting for people to think through that, I just want to personally say, you never know who you're gonna meet in life, and you never know who you're gonna come across. And I just am really grateful to your yes. And I want to name that in this space because I think you have said some really powerful things. We're a small but mighty group. We have big intentions of contributing to this community we call Oregon in a way that is positive and long lasting. And I think you have just provided us another couple breaks in our pathway that have been really powerful. But it started with you saying yes. And so thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I hope other people hear that and know that sometimes when you say yes, it can be the most powerful thing you can do. And no can be powerful too. I don't want to negate that.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So anyone have any questions?